Finding a job had become an urgent necessity for me. I had bills piling up and no steady income. So, when I stumbled upon a job listing on Craigslist offering great pay for minimal work with flexible hours, I jumped at the opportunity. The job was advertised as a clerical position at a small company. The ad mentioned the need for someone who could start immediately, and I figured it was worth a shot. I responded to the ad and received a prompt reply from a man named Mr. Harris. He seemed professional in his emails and asked me to come in for an interview the following day. He mentioned the office was located in an older building on the outskirts of town, but reassured me that it was safe and easy to find. The next day, I dressed in my best interview outfit and drove to the location. The building was isolated, surrounded by overgrown trees and weeds. It looked like it had seen better days with its cracked windows and faded paint. My unease grew, but I was determined to get the job. I walked up to the door, which had a small plaque with the company's name on it, Harris Enterprises. I knocked, and a moment later, Mr. Harris opened the door. He was a tall man in his 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and an overly enthusiastic smile. "Welcome." "You must be Thomas," he said, extending his hand. I shook his hand and nodded. "Yes, thank you for seeing me." He led me inside, and I couldn't help but notice how empty the building felt. The air was cool and stale, and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead. We walked down a long hallway lined with closed doors until we reached a small office. Mr. Harris gestured for me to sit. "Let's get started," he said, taking a seat behind his desk. The interview began normally enough. He asked about my previous work experience, my skills, and why I was interested in the job. But as we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His questions started to become more personal, probing into my life outside of work. "Do you live alone?" he asked casually, leaning back in his chair. I hesitated. "Yes, I do." He smiled, but there was something unsettling about it. "That's good. It means you can dedicate more time to the job." I nodded, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. After about 30 minutes, he stood up and extended his hand again. "Congratulations, you're hired. Can you start tomorrow?" I agreed, partly out of desperation and partly because I didn't want to be rude. He handed me a set of keys and gave me a brief rundown of my duties, which included organizing old documents and cleaning out storage rooms. The next day I arrived early, determined to make a good impression. Mr. Harris wasn't there when I arrived, but he had left a note on the desk with instructions for the day. I began sorting through the documents, which were old and dusty. It was tedious work, but I was grateful for the opportunity. As the hours passed, I started to notice odd things about the office. There were rooms filled with bizarre items, antique dolls, rusted tools, and old photographs that seemed out of place. The whole place had an eerie atmosphere that made me feel uneasy. Around midday, I took a break and decided to explore the building a bit more. I opened one of the closed doors and found a small storage room. Inside, there were boxes stacked high, and the smell of mold was overpowering. As I rummaged through the boxes, I found something that made my blood run cold. A collection of photographs showing various people, all with expressions of terror on their faces. I quickly put the photos back and closed the door, my heart racing. I wanted to leave, but I needed this job. I decided to keep working and avoid that room. A few days later, Mr. Harris gave me a new task. He handed me a box of old letters and told me to organize them by date. As I sorted through the letters, I began to notice a pattern. Many of them were written by people who had worked for Mr. Harris, detailing their experiences and expressing fear for their safety. One letter, in particular, caught my attention. It was from a woman named Linda, who had worked in the same position I was now in. She described feeling watched and finding disturbing items hidden around the office. Her letter ended abruptly, and I couldn't find any other documents about her. My anxiety grew with each passing day. Mr. Harris became more secretive and started giving me odd tasks, like cleaning out old rooms that hadn't been used in years. One evening, I was alone in the building when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I called out, but there was no answer. The footsteps grew louder, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I grabbed a heavy book from the desk and slowly walked towards the door. As I peeked out, I saw a shadowy figure at the end of the hallway. The figure was standing still, watching me. Fear surged through me, and I ran back to the office, locking the door behind me. I tried to call Mr. Harris, but there was no signal. I sat in the corner of the room, clutching the book, my mind racing with fear and confusion. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps stopped. I waited a few more minutes before unlocking the door and making a run for it. I didn't stop until I was outside, breathing in the cool night air. I got into my car and drove home, my hands shaking. The next day I didn't go to work. I couldn't bring myself to return to that place. I called Mr. Harris and told him I was quitting. He tried to convince me to stay, but I hung up and blocked his number. I reported everything to the police, but they found no evidence of any wrongdoing. The building was abandoned by the time they arrived, and Mr. Harris had disappeared. The experience left me traumatized, and I couldn't stop thinking about the photographs and the letters. Months later, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of me, taken from outside my apartment. On the back, there was a note, "We're always watching." Driving for a ride-share service had always been an easy way for me to make some extra money. I enjoyed the freedom of choosing my hours and the interesting people I met along the way. But one night, I had an experience that still haunts me. It was a chilly autumn evening, and I had been driving around for a few hours. The streets were quieter than usual, and I decided to check Craiglist for any rideshare requests. That's when I saw an ad from someone needing a ride to a remote location about an hour away. The payment offered was generous, and I figured it would be an easy trip. I replied to the ad, and soon received a response from someone named Tom. He seemed normal enough in his messages, and we arranged for me to pick him up at a nearby park. It was late, but I needed the extra cash, so I agreed. When I arrived at the park, it was deserted. The only light came from a flickering street lamp near the entrance. I felt a twinge of unease, but brushed it off. I texted Tom to let him know I was there, and a few moments later, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tom was tall and thin, wearing a long coat and carrying a large, old duffel bag. He approached the car slowly, his face partially obscured by the collar of his coat. I rolled down the window and greeted him. "Hey, you must be Tom? Need a lift?" I said, trying to sound friendly. He nodded and gave a tight smile. "Yes, thank you. It's quite a distance, so I appreciate it." Tom got into the back seat, placing the duffel bag on the seat beside him. As we started driving, I tried to make small talk, but he was mostly unresponsive, giving only short, vague answers. The silence in the car became increasingly uncomfortable, and I noticed a strange smell coming from his back. It was faint but unpleasant, like something rotting. I decided to ignore it and focus on the road. As we drove further out of town, the streets became darker and more desolate. The GPS directed us onto a narrow, winding road surrounded by dense woods. The sense of isolation grew stronger, and I felt a creeping sense of dread. After about 30 minutes of driving, Tom finally spoke up. "You must meet a lot of interesting people doing this job," he said, his voice oddly distant. "Yeah, you could say that," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light, "but it's mostly just regular folks needing a ride." He chuckled softly, but there was no warmth in it. "You never know who you might be picking up, though, do you?" The statement hung in the air, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror and saw him staring out the window, his face expressionless. I tried to focus on driving, but my mind raced with uneasy thoughts. As we continued, the strange smell from the duffel bag grew stronger. I couldn't ignore it any longer. "What's in the bag?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Tom's eyes flicked towards me in the mirror, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. "Just some old things," he finally said. "Nothing to worry about." But I was worried. The smell was overpowering, and his evasive answer only heightened my anxiety. I decided to stop at a gas station up ahead, hoping to get some fresh air and clear my head. "We need to make a quick stop," I said, pulling into the gas station. Tom didn't respond, just stared at me with a blank expression. I parked the car and got out, taking deep breaths of the cool night air. As I stood there, I saw the gas station attendant inside the store, and I considered going in to ask for help. Gathering my courage, I walked back to the car and opened the back door. "I need to see what's in the bag," I said firmly. Tom's demeanor changed instantly. His eyes narrowed and he clutched the bag protectively. "No, you don't," he said, his voice low and threatening. The tension in the air was palpable. I took a step back, my heart pounding. "If you don't let me see it, I'm calling the police." For a moment, we stared at each other in a standoff. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, Tom lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. I struggled to get up, but he was stronger than he looked. He grabbed the bag and started running towards the woods. I scrambled to my feet and ran into the gas station, shouting for help. The attendant called the police, and within minutes, a patrol car arrived. I explained everything to the officers, and they immediately began searching the area. After what felt like an eternity, they found Tom hiding in the woods, clutching the duffel bag. When they opened it, the smell that had been haunting me was explained. Inside the bag were human remains, carefully wrapped in plastic. Tom was arrested, and the police investigation revealed a disturbing truth. He had been using Craiglist to find rides and dispose of the remains of his victims. He was a serial killer, and I had narrowly escaped becoming his next target. The experience left me traumatized. For weeks, I couldn't sleep, haunted by nightmares of Tom's blank stare and the horrible smell of the bag. I stopped driving for the rideshare service, too fearful of what other dangers might be lurking behind innocent requests. When I first moved to the small town for a new job, I was excited about the fresh start. Finding an affordable place to live was my top priority, and I quickly turned to Craiglist. After a few days of searching, I found a room for rent that seemed perfect. The price was right, and the ad mentioned a charming old house owned by a sweet elderly woman. I contacted the landlady, Mrs. Wilkins, and she responded almost immediately. Her voice on the phone was warm and welcoming, and she invited me to come over that weekend to see the room. She even offered to make tea and show me around the property. I accepted, feeling relieved that my housing search might be over. That Saturday, I drove to Mrs. Wilkins' house. It was a quaint two-story home, tucked away on a quiet street. The front yard was well kept, with blooming flowers and a neatly trimmed hedge. As I walked up to the door, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. Mrs. Wilkins greeted me at the door with a smile. She was a petite woman with silver hair neatly tied back in a bun. Her kind eyes and gentle demeanor put me at ease instantly. "Welcome, dear. Come in," she said, ushering me inside. The interior of the house was just as charming as the outside. It was filled with antique furniture, lace curtains, and the smell of freshly baked cookies. Mrs. Wilkins led me to the kitchen, where she had laid out a plate of cookies and a pot of tea. We chatted for a while, and she told me stories about the town and the history of the house. Eventually, she showed me the room I would be renting. It was cozy and well-furnished, with a large window that let in plenty of light. I felt comfortable and decided to take the room. The first few weeks went by smoothly. Mrs. Wilkins was an excellent host, always offering homemade meals and asking about my day. I settled into my new job and started to feel at home. But slowly, things began to change. One night I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a faint creaking sound. At first I thought it was just the old house settling, but the noise continued, growing louder. It sounded like someone was walking around upstairs. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just Mrs. Wilkins moving about. But the next night the noises returned, this time accompanied by soft, unintelligible murmurs. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a conversation. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I tiptoed out of my room and up the stairs, careful not to make any noise. As I reached the top of the stairs, the murmurs stopped abruptly. The hallway was dark, and the only light came from a faint glow under Mrs. Wilkins' bedroom door. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to decide whether to knock or retreat to my room. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Mrs. Wilkins appeared, her face pale and her eyes wide. "Oh dear, did I wake you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "No, I just heard some noises and got curious," I replied, feeling a bit embarrassed. She smiled weakly and said, "I'm sorry. Sometimes I talk to myself when I can't sleep. It's an old habit." I nodded and returned to my room, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences escalated. I would find doors slightly ajar that I was sure I had closed, and items in my room seemed to move on their own. Mrs. Wilkins' behavior also became more erratic. She would often appear in the hallway outside my room, watching me with a strange intensity. One evening, I came home to find the front door unlocked. I walked in cautiously, calling out for Mrs. Wilkins. There was no answer. I searched the house, growing more anxious with each empty room I checked. Finally, I reached the basement door, which was slightly open. A chill ran down my spine. I descended the creaky wooden steps, the basement growing colder and darker with each step. The air was damp and musty, and a single bare light bulb hung from the ceiling. In the corner, I saw Mrs. Wilkins hunched over something on the floor. She was muttering to herself, her back turned to me. "Mrs. Wilkins," I called out softly. She didn't respond. I took a step closer and saw that she was kneeling beside a small chest. Inside the chest were various items, including old, blood-stained clothing and what looked like a small, rusted knife. My heart raced as I realized the gravity of what I was seeing. Suddenly, Mrs. Wilkins turned to face me, her eyes wild. "You shouldn't be down here," she said, her voice low and menacing. Fear surged through me, and I backed away slowly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude," I stammered. She stood up, clutching the knife. "You need to leave now," she said, taking a step toward me. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran out of the house and jumped into my car, fumbling with the keys in my panic. Finally, I started the engine and sped away, my mind racing with fear and disbelief. I drove straight to the nearest police station and reported everything. The officers took me seriously and followed me back to the house. When we arrived, Mrs. Wilkins was gone. The house was eerily silent, and the basement door was closed. The police searched the house and found the chest, just as I had described. They launched an investigation, and it turned out that Mrs. Wilkins had a dark past. She had been involved in several suspicious disappearances over the years, but no one had ever connected the dots until now. Mrs. Wilkins was eventually found and arrested. The news of her arrest shocked the small town, and many people came forward with their own unsettling encounters with her. I moved out immediately and found a new place to live, but the experience left me deeply shaken. For months, I couldn't sleep properly. Every creak and rustle in my new apartment sent waves of anxiety through me. I kept thinking about how close I had come to becoming another one of Mrs. Wilkins's victims. The fear lingered, a constant reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk behind seemingly harmless interactions. I've always loved finding unique pieces of furniture, and Craigslist has been my go-to place for bargains. One evening, as I was scrolling through listings, I came across an antique dresser that caught my eye. It was beautiful, ornate carvings, solid wood, and it was priced unbelievably low. I couldn't resist. I contacted the seller immediately. Her name was Mrs. Whitley, and she seemed friendly enough over the phone. She explained that she was downsizing and needed to sell some old furniture quickly. We arranged for me to come over the next day to see the dresser in person. The following afternoon, I drove to her apartment in an older part of town. The building was a bit run down, but it had a certain charm. I buzzed her apartment, and she greeted me with a warm smile when I arrived at her door. Mrs. Whitley was an elderly woman, small and frail, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "Come in, dear," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "The dresser is right this way." I followed her down a narrow hallway lined with old photographs and paintings. The apartment smelled of mothballs and dust, adding to the sense of stepping back in time. The living room was cluttered with furniture and knickknacks, giving it a cozy but slightly eerie feel. "There it is," she said, pointing to the dresser in the corner. It was even more beautiful in person. I walked over to inspect it, running my hand over the smooth wood. As I opened the drawers, they moved effortlessly, revealing velvet-lined interiors. But when I reached the bottom drawer, it felt unusually heavy and jammed. "Let me help you with that," Mrs. Whitley offered, coming over. She tugged on the drawer, and it finally slid open. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. There, nestled among some old linens, was a small, mummified figure. It looked like a child, its skin shriveled and darkened with age. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. What is that?" I stammered, pointing at the horrifying sight. Mrs. Whitley's expression shifted slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Oh, that? It's just an old doll, dear. It's been in the family for years." But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. The figure looked too real, too human. I felt a wave of nausea and fear. I don't think I can take the dresser," I managed to say, backing towards the door. "I'm sorry, I have to go." As I turned to leave, Mrs. Whitley's demeanor changed completely. Her warm smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You've seen too much," she said, her voice low and menacing. I bolted for the door, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I could hear her footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I flung the door open and raced down the hallway out of the apartment and into the safety of my car. I drove straight home, my mind racing with fear and confusion. What had I just seen? And why was she so desperate to keep me from leaving? When I got home, I called the police and reported everything. The officers took my statement seriously and went to investigate Mrs. Whitley's apartment. What they found confirmed my worst fears. The mummified figure was indeed a child, and it had been hidden in that dresser for decades. Mrs. Whitley was taken into custody, and a full investigation was launched. It turned out that Mrs. Whitley had a dark past. Decades ago, her young child had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. The case had gone cold, and she had moved on, or so everyone thought. But she had been hiding the truth all along, keeping the mummified remains of her child hidden in that dresser. The news shocked the community, and it left me shaken to my core. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to buying that dresser, about the secrets it held. The experience left me with a deep sense of unease and a new appreciation for the hidden dangers that can lurk behind seemingly harmless interactions. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the image of that mummified child. I had nightmares about Mrs. Whitley chasing me through her cluttered apartment, her eyes cold and menacing. I stopped using Craiglist for a while, too fearful of what other horrors might be lurking behind innocent listings. I tried to move on, to put the incident behind me, but it wasn't easy. Every time I passed a piece of antique furniture, I felt a chill run down my spine. I started researching similar cases, trying to understand how something so horrific could go unnoticed for so long. The more I learned, the more I realized how many dark secrets could be hidden in plain sight. One day, I received a call from the detective handling the case. He thanked me for coming forward and told me that Mrs. Whitley had confessed to everything. She had been living with the guilt and the horror of what she had done for years, but she had never been able to let go of her child's remains. The detective assured me that justice would be served, but his words did little to ease my mind. The experience had changed me, leaving a permanent mark on my soul. I had looked into the eyes of pure evil, and it had stared back at me with a calm, almost serene expression. If these stories made your skin crawl, remember to hit that like button and share the chills with your friends. Subscribe for more terrifying tales, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a moment of horror. Stay safe and keep watching for more spine-tingling stories. See you in the next nightmare.